The 1950s and 60s in the United States was a time of unrest and a time where tensions ran high.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Especially in the South. Within the decades, schools across the South were integrated, many by force. African Americans' bold action to gain voting rights was met by violence that state governors claimed to be powerless to prevent. America would not be the same. Some leaders fought the changes the country sought to implement. These mayors and governors resisted federal intervention and allowed the Klan and other violent forces within their state to freely attack citizens. But other leaders worked to find common ground and to better their state. John McKeithen was the 53rd governor of Louisiana. His term stretched the critical time from 1964 to 1972. During that time, he was a moderate on race relations, brought industry to his state, and worked for social reform. Long before that, even as a child, he showed signs of the leader he was to become.
There was a feeling of leadership about him from the very beginning. He played football and was always the one that wanted to be out front and doing the best. You would think that maybe that would turn other kids away from him always wanting to be front and center and doing. But unusually, they loved him. His friends loved him. They wanted to be around him. He was just had a great sense of liking other people, and they liked him.
In 1942, McKeithen began his service in the Army.
So he went right into the Army from graduating, and was there for a number of years in the South Pacific, and of course that's one of the times when his leadership skills began to show very decidedly.
Following his return from service in 1948, John McKeithen was elected as a Louisiana State Representative. 5 years later, he began serving on the Public Service Commission. After serving over 9 years on the Public Service Commission, McKeithen ran for governor. He wanted to help Louisiana economically and said during his campaign, "At no time in our history have we more needed leadership answerable to all of the citizens who make this state great." After falling second to De Lesseps Morrison in the primaries, McKeithen was faced with a runoff. Morrison was a popular candidate as he was a former mayor of New Orleans.
Morrison had a commanding lead in the first primary, and so, again, I think he felt the odds were awfully stacked against him.
McKeithen, however, with his appeal as a populist, emerged victorious in the runoff election. He went on to beat Charlton Lyons, the Republican candidate, in the general election. On May 12, 1964, John McKeithen was inaugurated as governor. Within his first term, McKeithen confronted racial turmoil in Bogalusa, Louisiana. The Ku Klux Klan had a strong presence in Bogalusa. The African American community was determined to have their rights recognized and defied the Klan's power. On August 10, 1967, the Bogalusa Voters and Civic League began a 106-mile march from Bogalusa to the Louisiana state capitol in Baton Rouge to dramatize the repression of black citizens. A little over 2 years prior, Martin Luther King Jr. had led a similar march from Selma to the steps of the Montgomery Capitol. That march was disrupted by a violent attack on the marchers by state troopers. Conversely, in Louisiana, Governor McKeithen sent 700 National Guardsmen and 500 state troopers to protect those participating in the march from Bogalusa. Following the march, John McKeithen set up a biracial Louisiana Commission on Human Relations, Rights, and Responsibilities. He understood that someone had to be a mediator so change could come as peacefully as possible, and he took that challenge head on, unlike the other radical Southern governors at that time. Another key concern of Governor McKeithen was the economy of the state. He sought new industries for Louisiana, and by the end of his term, the state led the South in economic expansion. The most remembered economic contribution came from his promotion of the idea to create the Superdome. He wanted to bring events and conventions to New Orleans so the city could contend with other metropolitan areas.
He was very instrumental in getting the Superdome built, and he just intended to get it built. And at the time, the Astrodome in Houston was the only covered dome that we knew anything about. So there was this Astrodome in Houston in Texas, and he said, I'm going to get that thing built. I do not want Louisiana to have to tip their hat to Texas.
The Superdome would be completed 3 years after McKeithen left office. In the years since completion, the Superdome has hosted 7 Super Bowl games, the 1988 Republican National Convention, and a papal visit from John Paul II. In his second term as governor, John McKeithen led reform efforts in the Department of Corrections and improvements in the state prison system. He also implemented the strongest code of ethics for public officials in state history. The code of ethics was widely approved by voters who wanted integrity from their state officials.
He promoted, set up an ethics board that was unique at the time, and other states came in and copied.
In 1972, John McKeithen retired from his position as governor. After leaving office, McKeithen continued to practice law and oversee an oil and gas exploration company. John McKeithen passed away on June 4, 1999. He is still remembered across Louisiana for improving race relations and boosting the economy of the state. John McKeithen's political spirit is reflected in his family's dedication to public service. His son, Fox McKeithen, served as the Louisiana Secretary of State. His granddaughter, Marjorie McKeithen, served as Assistant Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Natural Resources. John McKeithen was an outlier to the characterization of Southern governors in the 60s. It was said that because of McKeithen, Louisiana never had a Selma. 27 years after the Superdome was built, a memorial statue was dedicated to Governor McKeithen on January 24, 2002. The Superdome is now one of Louisiana's greatest economic investments in history.
Were it not for his efforts, I'm sure it never would have been constructed.
John McKeithen thought that Louisiana was a place that people could live together and learn from each other. John McKeithen believed in all of Louisiana.